Not every crime leaves fingerprints. Some are born in code. Welcome to truecrime.exe, where fiction feels far too real.
Good evening. Tonight we ask a hard question. What happened to 34 men at Taal Lake, a calm black mirror sitting on top of a volcano? Empty boats adrift, engines still running, fish pens creaking in the dark, science, rumor, and grief pulling in different directions, inspired by real conditions around Taal Lake and Taal Volcano. Specific characters and timelines are fictionalized for narrative clarity. Before we dive in, tell me in the comments, where are you watching from and what time is it there? I love seeing the map light up. If you enjoy slow burn true crime with no jump scares, please subscribe and hit like. It helps more than you know. Headphones on, lights low. Taal Lake begins now. Prologue. The 34. At first light, the lake looks like polished obsidian. From the ridge above, Tagaytay's cafes sit on their heels, half asleep, while the caldera breathes a thin sash of steam over the water. On the shoreline below, plastic chairs scrape concrete, coffee whistles, dogs nose at coils of wet rope. Someone kills the outboard of a fiberglass banker and lets the boat glide, the hull whispering against bamboo poles. By 7, the rumor has finished its walk. Another man did not come home. That makes 34. No sirens, no tape. The lake keeps no chalk outlines. Its ledger is quiet. A spiderweb of pen marks inside barangay blotters, Coast Guard line items, the missing returned column on a clipboard in the fisheries office, and now an Excel sheet a cousin keeps on a hand-me-down laptop. If you stare at the sheet long enough, you can almost convince yourself there is a pattern, and that patterns, like lake winds, can be read. But the lake has more moods than names, and the families who live with both know this better than anyone. Timeline, 16 months, at a glance. Span, 16 months of incidents recorded across multiple barangays. Cluster 1, late Amihan, late February, 3 nights. 4 men in 3 nights during dead calm conditions. Cluster 2, the week after a major fish kill, early May, 7 days. 5 men disappear amid patchy water conditions. Cluster 3, non-conforming cases, months 8 through 16. Scattered incidents that don't fit the night shift, child caretaker pattern. A ferry pilot on a weekday morning. A mechanic on a walkway, debt-tangled disputes. Anchor date, week of August 12th, the disappearance of Marion Santos. In the pages that follow, relative time references, e.g., 2 days later, the week after the fish kill, tie back to this frame. The first question is always when. 3 calendars hang in the kitchen of Luz Santos. 1 from the pawn shop, 1 from a feed store, 1 from a funeral home that leaves calendars the way fishermen leave fish. As proof, life goes on. Luz taps the week of August 12th with a spoon handle. He left at 8, she says. Said the cages needed checking. The water was behaving. Her husband, Marion, tended tilapia pens for a consortium that pays by the kilo by the storm. In fair weather, the job is simple. Watch the bamboo lattice work for tear and theft. Feed the blue mouths that appear at dawn like coins tossed into a fountain. In foul, the job is to hold on. He texted at 9:11, Luz says, scrolling. Lamp faint. Will finish south cages. Don't wait up. By 10:40, the phone went dead. At midnight, a neighbor found Marion's boat nosing the pilings near the ferry wharf. Engine coughing, bowline frayed, the deck salted with pellets, fish as frantic as beads in a broken necklace. Marion was not in the boat. Marion was not anywhere. The barangay captain came. The Philippine Coast Guard at Talisay logged it. A diver wrote the depth on his hand with a Sharpie and slipped under. By daybreak, the search had lost the light. Sometimes they drift, the diver told Luz gently, a phrase that covers current, fate, and bureaucracy. On the second day, a cousin wrote number 34 near Marion's name in the spreadsheet. When is the question, because when becomes where and where becomes how, and how, if you are lucky, becomes why. A lake with a furnace under it. Taal is both lake and volcano, a dish holding a flame. It looks calm from Tagaytay's postcards, tiny boats like dashes of rice across black broth. But the broth is alive. It inhales and exhales. It warms the water from below. Sometimes it pricks it with sulfur. Sometimes it shakes. What makes Taal different, says Dr. Estrella Viado, a volcanologist who has studied gas emissions here for 12 monsoon seasons, isn't just the obvious that it sits inside itself. It's the plumbing. Heat moves through cracks like breath through reeds. You don't always see it, but you feel it. She offers the mechanism in 2 lines. In dead calm, CO2 can pool at the waterline. A bent head below the gunnel may inhale not air. This is localized pooling, not a Lake Neo-style overturn. I am not saying this explains 34, she adds. I am saying the lake is not empty when you cannot see it. Names. A journalist collects names the way fishermen collect hooks, carefully, knowing each will find its own hold. With permission from families, I write them on a yellow pad. Noah Aquino, 41, ferry pilot. Boat recovered near Laurel, anchor missing, deck dry. Jet Bautista, 27, caretaker. Last text to 11 a.m. Dogs barking on east cages. Ray Dyson, 34, net mender. Vanished on a calm Thursday. Thermos still warm. Marion Santos, 39, husband to Luz. Engine idling. Pellet bag torn. 2 knives sheathed. Junjun Rivera, 19, first season. Rookie knots neat as rosary beads. 34 men over 16 months. The list never makes a straight line. The Coast Guard confirms 9 fatalities. Bodies recovered days later along Pansipit River, the lake's narrow throat to the sea. Police list 7 more as missing, presumed drowned, 4 as capsize under investigation, and 14 as unresolved. In family kitchens, the word is simpler. Wala, gone. The first cluster, and the weather that lied. The first cluster, 4 men in 3 nights, came at the tail of Amihan, late February, when northeast winds ease and the lake hangs its shoulders. You can hear voices carry from miles away on such nights. Engines idle as if afraid to make ripples. On the second night of the cluster, a call went out on VHF Ch16 at 2:14 a.m. Bunker adrift south of Sampaloc Point. Anyone close? The voice is recorded on the Coast Guard log as unknown male, Tagalog peppered with the English of emergencies. A second voice breaks in. Copy. Light seen near the fish cages. Then a third, closer to panic. Walang tao. The boat is empty. By sunrise, there were 3 empty boats. One with a length of rope melted at the end, like caramel. One with a clean, deliberate cut through the bowline. One tied to a bamboo post with a knot good enough to hang a man, and yet bad enough to let a boat slip when scolded by the smallest wind. The fishermen measured and argued. Cut clean, one said, tapping the fray. Heat, another insisted, pointing to the bead of hardened plastic Weather reports that week list light airs. Families say the weather lied. Turf, tilapia, and men who collect debts. Taal's surface is a grid of ownership and resentment. Fish cages stitch the lake into squares, tilapia on tilapia, with a few cages of milkfish, bangkas, and baskets where vendors fatten tawilis when the season allows. Each cage is bamboo, nylon, and calculation, floating economies lashed to drum floats and rumour. Officially, you need a permit for cages. Unofficially, you need allies, lookouts, and a memory for debts. If a cage breaks, fish don't ask permission which direction to swim, says Berto, who has worked the night shift for 3 owners. You can lose a month in an hour. Some men take this personally. There are stories, never police complaints, always stories, of cages slashed in the night, of caretakers pulled into amulets of darkness, of engines that run out of gas because someone decided they should. You can hire men to watch your cages, Berto says, and other men to watch the men who watch. I ask whether these hired watchers might be connected to the missing. Berto snorts softly. Connected is a big word. The lake makes neighbours. Not all neighbours smile. The second cluster, after the fish kill. 2 months later, the lake bleached. Photographs show rows of dead tilapia bobbing like silver knuckles across the water. The Department of Agriculture called it sudden change in temperature and oxygen. A fish kill, not unusual here when weather and water turn their faces. Families called it loss, which is both larger and more exact. In the week after the fish kill, early May, 5 men disappeared. Lara, whose brother Ray tended cages for a company called, depending on who you ask, Blue Crest or Blue Crest Aquaculture, remembers it this way. They told them to check the deeper nets before noon. Ray went early to beat the sun. He messaged me at 8:13. Water tastes bitter. I told him not to sip the lake. He sent me a smiley. At 8:40, the neighbours saw his boat near the deep drums. At 9:02, the boat bumped the pier and no one was inside. A municipal diver shows me his logs, names blacked for privacy, depth readings jagged like a seismograph. After fish kills, he says, you get strange pockets. Hot here, cold there, sour breath in between. If you fall wrong, if you breathe wrong. He doesn't finish the sentence. Dr. Viado is cautious. Localized CO2 burps are possible, she says. Neo-scale overturn is not likely here. But can a small area, late at night, under a still ceiling of air, become unfriendly to breath? Yes. Science asks for arrays and instruments. Grief asks for something to fold and put in a drawer. The third cluster, men who didn't fit the pattern. Not all 34 wore rubber boots and carried bait. Noel, 41, drove a ferry between Tagaytay and the island for tourists and workers. He was a talker, his wife says. He could make a day a little shorter. He vanished at 10 in the morning on a weekday, the water ruffled by tourist laughter. His boat drifted into a curtain of bamboo, its canopy half collapsed. He was wearing his vest, she says. And then, as if bargaining with the universe, she repeats it. He was wearing his vest. Another, Danny, was a motor mechanic who collected 2-stroke engines the way children collect shells. He disappeared on land, if the records are right. Last seen walking along a path between cages, a toolbox in one hand, his laugh in the air. His tools turned up later in a different toolbox, beneath a different hut. Borrowed, the owner said, shrugging. The police wrote unresolved. The family wrote Danny on a candle and burned it to the glass. 2 men had debts to people whose titles are always Mr. and whose stories travel between whisper and warning. Collection here can be a conversation or a consequence. I ask a police officer whether he's seen links between debt collectors and drownings. He smiles with his whole mouth and none of his eyes. Everyone owes everyone, he says, and the lake pays what it wants. FOI, freedom of information, and the hollow of a word. Under the Philippines FOI program, I request incident reports from the PCG, Philippine Coast Guard, municipal police, and the provincial disaster office. Most respond with courtesies and attachments. A few say processing will take time. Thank you for your patience is a national virtue. The PCG sends PDFs with timestamps and coordinates, small narratives typed by men who live in boats. They are matter of fact. Banker found adrift at 141 degrees bearing from Sampaloc Point. No occupant. Recovered to pier. Family informed. Body recovered downstream in Pansipit. Indication of freshwater drowning. Sometimes a line stands alone, without explanation. Bowline severed cleanly. The police send blotter extracts where most cases are drunk and disorderly. Petty theft. Neighbor fights over karaoke volume. The missing men entries sit in the middle like a thumbprint in cooling cement. Left to check fish cages. Did not return. From the provincial office comes a map with 34 pins. The pins cluster and then refuse to. They are not evenly spaced. They prefer odd hours. 13 of the pins have notes that include the phrase, "no signs of struggle." 5 include engine idling. 8 include weather fair. 1 includes witness reported knocking sound across water preceding disappearance. Unresolved has a lot of room inside it. She heard knocking. The witness is Maya, 11, a child whose drawings crowd the family fridge. Dogs, a volcano that looks like a sleeping cat, a boat with a flag that says happy. On the afternoon her father vanished. She had been watching a K-drama on a phone while her mother sold corn by the pier. In the evening she fell asleep on a bench. I woke up, she tells me in the schoolyard, because I heard knocking, like on a door, but there was no door. She mimics the sound with knuckles on the desk. Tuck, 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 pause, tuck, tuck, and then looks embarrassed at her own seriousness. It came from the water, she says. Papa knocked hello when he came home. 2 knocks. This was not hello. I ask whether she told the police this. She nods. They wrote it. She looks at the ground. They write everything. Maya's father is Jet, 27, caretaker, whose last text mentioned dogs. When I asked the barangay captain about dogs, he laughs sadly. There are always dogs. He does not mean dogs. The noises a lake makes when men sing. It is hard to write about superstition without making a fool of either yourself or others. Men drown, and the lake uses its own language to say so. There are the old stories. Sirena, who braid storms into hair, fish that turn into women and back. There are the new ones, white vans on the ridge, phones that ring from the bottom with caller ID that reads home. I put these in a separate notebook and, for now, leave them there. But there are also facts that look like superstition until proved otherwise. Sulfur can smell like a crime scene if you don't expect it. CO2 can pool. Seiches, standing waves rocked by wind or distant tremors, can make a perfectly calm lake lift a corner, just enough to stumble a man who did not know it had corners. And sound does funny things. Waves slap bamboo in patterns that are like tapping. The lake carries a knock from a kilometer away, like a joke told at one end of a table and laughed at the other. You can mistake an engine for thunder, thunder for trucks, trucks for drums, and knocks for language. The more you want a message, the more likely you are to hear one. At a chapel in Laurel, women sing Hail Mary while the men coil ropes. A boy in a Captain America shirt carries a candle 3 sizes too big for his hand. We sing because it helps us count, an old man says. You can forget what day it is when the lake takes the day. A diver counts what he cannot see. Rolly, 48, has 30 meters of scar tissue and 20 years of stories. He dies where the water is brown at noon and black at night, where the silt turns to smoke the moment a fin touches bottom. You'll learn to read the water by your teeth, he says. If it tastes like a battery, you go up. He laughs, so he doesn't sound like a warning. Rolly was part of 7 of the 34 searches. 2 were easy, he says, getting the most awful adjectives out of the way first. They stayed. The current did not argue. 3 were tasks of days and misdirection. The families talk, the water doesn't. 2 yielded nothing. Those are the ones that visit him when he closes his eyes. Rolly counting breaths in darkness, the sound of his own exhale a train through a tunnel, the rope rough in his hand and, as he swears to me, warmth where there should be cold. I ask about CO2. He shrugs. I know what air is for. I also know what not air feels like. He says men drown in buckets and bathtubs, that the difference between dangerous and fatal is sometimes just height, how far your mouth is from mercy. You fall, he says, and maybe the boat moves. Maybe it doesn't. Maybe... He lets maybe do the work of a paragraph, a pattern that doesn't like being seen. I spend a week with families and my yellow pad. When I stop looking for the pattern, I think I find one. 26 of the 34 either worked for or near large fish cage operators, companies that rent eyes and hands by the month. 21 went missing between midnight and 4 a.m. 19 were last seen within shouting distance of cages that had been cut in the previous week. Nets slashed by poachers or wind or accident, depending on who you ask. And then it slips. Noel vanished at 10 a.m. Danny on a walkway. Ray with a text about taste. A pattern comforts only until a single story breaks it. 34 is too many for comfort and not enough for statistics. We are nowhere near proof. When I ask Dr. Viado about cluster logic, she smiles like a teacher. You can bend data, she says, until it begs for mercy. I can tell you when gas rose, where the wind sat. The night's current sulked. But 34 is an argument with more than one speaker. The company line. I contact 3 large operators. 1 answers with a press release. They comply with all regulations. They provide employment to the community. They mourn with families. They have instituted mandatory vests and buddy checks. And any suggestion of wrongdoing is irresponsible speculation. Another says nothing. The 3rd, through a lawyer, insists their name not appear at all, and that if it does, they will make the court their lake. I paraphrase, because their letter costs by the syllable. Workers, off record, say this: night shifts thinned during the fish kill, because a pen of dead tilapia feeds no one. Attempts to steal surviving stock increased. Some men who disappeared had argued with neighbors about feed that went missing. One had told a cousin he was tired of someone else's debts. Debt in a lakeside town is not a scandal. It is the air. But air can also be thin. The gas station film that claims to help. A convenience store 10 kilometers north has a camera that faces the road. On a night when Sarah Miller vanishes in Oregon, a camera there catches a truck with glare on its plate. I think of this when Agoncillo's store shows me a clip they call relevant. At 2:03 a.m., 2 scooters pass, one with a sack of fish feed on the footrest. At 2:08, a pickup truck moves slowly, its bed empty and its cab full of the kind of silence you read into pixels when you want someone to be guilty. A barangay councillor watches the footage with me. "We have eyes everywhere," he says, which is never as comforting as the speaker intends. When we look too long, the video becomes an Inkblot. In one corner, a boy tosses a ball. In another, a cat crosses and disappears. The truck drives on. No answers follow. The men who did come home. We talk about the missing because absence drags a louder chain than presence. But men fell and were pulled out and coughed and lived. Arman, 33, slipped in January, he says. 1 minute standing, the next the boat a rumour above him. He insists a hand pushed him up. No one else was there. I write current lucky angle. And he laughs at my not wanting to believe. "Fine," he says. "Right hand. Put the quotation marks if the paper is expensive." Luis, 22, got wrapped in a net like a fish and made it out because a knot he'd tied badly betrayed him at the right time. He wears the knot on a cord around his neck now, a shriveled, salt-stiff thing he calls his angel. "If you ask me what happened to the 34, he says,
Case closed. Archived in the synthetic vault. If you dare to return, the next file awaits. Truecrime.exe. The line between fiction and fear.